Well, good morning, afternoon, friends. It is afternoon already. We're glad you've joined us for the second installment of Face to Face with Racism. This week, we're talking about white privilege and how white privilege functions as a form of covert racism and covert white supremacy. This week, our guests are returning Christian Watkins from the Windland Fellow for Faith and Justice at the General Board of Church and Society in Washington, D.C., fellow United Methodist minister, and Malia Minyard is a student at Mesquite High School, right?
I'm at Horn High School, actually.
Oh, Horn. Oh, I'm so sorry.
You're totally fine.
Rising junior at Horn High School. I'm just going in order around my screen. John Astle is a member of the St. Stephen community. And Betsy Vasquez is sitting in for Isabel Marquez, who unfortunately is sick this afternoon. And so we're glad to have Betsy with us. Betsy, could you give us a little bit about your context?
Absolutely. I'm a pastoral leader at Gracia Viva United Methodist Church.
And Gracia Viva is a largely or entirely Hispanic community?
That is correct.
That partners with Oak Lawn United Methodist.
That is correct.
And ministers large to LGBTQ plus persons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Christian, we'll start with you. Kick us off.
Well, thank you once again for having me as part of the conversation. I appreciate both of you all's friendship and welcome to those who are joining us online. White privilege is a very elusive, very frustrating or antagonizing term. Some people instantly have an instant recoil to it. Other people know exactly how the word or how the privilege impacts them. And a lot of people are caught in between. They just don't know what to think. But without understanding what bias is, what personal bias is, and what racism is, we can't fully unpack what white privilege is. Okay, so all of us have biases. Every human that I know of has biases. Whether they're good or bad, that's between you and your God. But when someone says that Black people are more prone to being criminals, when someone says Hispanics or that this is our country, go back to your own home. When someone says I only date these kinds of people, right? Those are biases. Now, the racism comes into play when that bias is turned into action, right? When someone devalues another person because of their ancestral heritage or because of their skin color or because of, the region of the world that they come from. When someone says that this is our church and they exclude gays, that's an ism that's not based in race, but it is similar to it. And then white privilege, and then going further into that racism, we know that there are institutions and systems that have been developed that codify, that propagate, that make some folks superior to others. And the white privilege comes into play when when persons of white ancestry, of the white race. Because I believe race is a social construct, but we can get into that some other time. When white people benefit from access to benefits, to privileges that other folks don't have access to. Say for instance, me and a white colleague are doing the same work. We have similar credentials and whatnot, but I get paid less. That's a form of white privilege, or they have access to certain boardrooms. Or certain people rely on them more so than they rely. That's white privilege, and I'll stop there.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to add into that, Christian. That's a good concept to start with, and biases are so wide and interesting to digest, because uh, I guess our human nature is automatically attached, or let's say there's a certain magnetism on biases, because we may be dealing with a certain issue, but because our biases are so into us, we automatically go into the race. For example, I was talking to one of the members at a church, and we were talking about racism, and she mentioned an issue where she was bullied in whenever she was a child, and had an issue perceiving all black people as bad because of that. And I'm like, well, let's start disintegrated, or actually let's start talking about the issue per se, because the issue in on its root, it's bullying, it's not racism. So the way that you perceive as all black people are bad is because there's a racism bias. What we need to be targeting is the bullying that in the issue that you experience as a child. Now, because of that, you automatically perceive that all black people are bad, and that is a part, or a way of racism in your part. Because even though you were a victim of bullying, that doesn't mean that all black people are bad. So I guess generalizing is the way that we automatically do this with a certain race, or with a certain sector of our society. For example, saying all Hispanics are just good at gardening, where we can be good at computers as well. So generalizing, that is the greatest, I will say, way that our biases come alive.
Mm.
And that's what we need to be targeting and working within ourselves. That way we can start creating a better society where biases are less than our consciousness, or divinity within ourselves. That's my take.
Thank you. Malia.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things for me that I am pushing right now, I guess, is that for myself, I thought I was pretty close to done learning, I guess you could say. Uh, I guess my middle school, early high school years, I was like, man, I'm woke. I'm going to the protests. I'm making the posts. I'm having the conversations, and I was like, I'm good. Like, I'm the teacher now. I'm not the student anymore, nothing like that. And so I think it was last year I read, or the summer after my freshman year, I chose to read White Fragility for a summer assignment by Robin DiAngelo. And I went into it with the mindset of, this isn't for me, but I'm going to have even more, things under my belt to be able to talk to people with now. And I read it, and I was like, the first chapter, I was like, oh, this book is for me. This book is written about people like me, people who were like, I've been doing the work. I am the woke white person. And that book was a huge eye opener for me, that I have so much to learn, and I'm going to continue to have so much to learn until I'm dead, to be honest. Like, it's not going to stop. And so, yeah, I think that's a big thing for, as far as white privilege, is that um you I mean, I don't, in my speech, I talked about how I think one of the biggest manifestations of white privilege is that you technically, white people have the choice whether they want to deal with racism or not. You know what I mean? Because it's not presented. You know, it's not actually a problem for us. I'm never gonna have to worry about not getting a job because I'm white. So why do I have to deal with racism? And so I think that, you know, white privilege is an all-encompassing term, but I think for me, what I'm realizing is that's one of the biggest forms of it, that comes to mind, is that, you know, white people have the choice of whether to deal with racism, whether to combat racism, whether to be anti-racist. And I think it's a choice that we all need to start making more often.
You hit the nail in the head.
Thank you.
Your description reminds me of one of my favorite descriptions that I've heard recently from Darnell St. Romain, who talked about whiteness being the blank page. And I think that I related this because as a person who writes, like I hate looking at the blank page, right? But what he was saying was whiteness is that's the page, and everybody else has got to fit onto the page. So it's when my whiteness becomes so ubiquitous and everything about my identity, the way I see the world, the way who I am becomes the norm and everyone else has got to fit into it, then I've already started with a privilege that I don't even see because it's just the page, right? Sorry, John.
No, I was just going to say that feeds into Christian's comment about social construct, but we can get into that another week.
Well, thank you, Malia. That was quite instructive, actually. You know, I don't know about you, but I can say I'm fully woke, but I do like to think that I'm only half asleep. And trying to get to the next level, I've really reflected on that a lot. Now, I think, you know, we're talking specifically about white privilege here, but I also have male privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And that was reflected back at me back in the early 80s when I was in my mid to late 20s, where I had gotten a job promotion and I was talking about it with a coworker. And I made a flippant comment like, well, I guess I'm lucky to be a man. Now, where that came from, I don't remember the context, but she looked at me and she said, and don't you forget it. And then I realized and got to reflecting on that, and that stuck with me since the early 80s. But there's another privilege that I have. Now, I'll always be white and I'll always be male. But this other privilege is I have able-bodied privilege. Now, I haven't always had able-bodied privilege. I've sprained my ankle. I've had a hernia. I've recovered from surgery. During those times, trying to get up a flight of stairs to the second floor is difficult, painful, takes a long time. When I'm able-bodied, I don't think of it. I just walk up the stairs and I'm on the second floor. Fortunately, there's an aid. There's the elevator. I can take the elevator. And I got to thinking, you know, that is one way that I can experience how people that don't have the same privilege as I, how they might feel. Now, I'll never know the circumstances of my Black friends and neighbors, but I do know the feeling of being temporarily disabled. So I got to thinking, well, you know, that elevator to me is kind of like one way that affirmative action may have worked for the Black people. That has helped them to get up to that second floor. Is it enough? No. We've still got a lot of work to do. But, you know, I'm just wondering how we that have this privilege can turn that privilege to help others who don't enjoy that same privilege. And I'm looking for, some specifics and some general ideas. And I'm hoping that Christian and Betsy can kind of give me some guidance there, because I'm looking to be more woke.
Thank you. And I think that's, I'm not sure about you, Christian, but I think in my perspective, that is the first step. The first step is acknowledging and trying to look into and reflect within yourself on what can I change? What can I do? That willingness to provide or to be empathic to the other to your neighbor, because it's the same thing with me. I try to reflect on my actions, on the way that I talk to my neighbor, the way that I talk to my colleagues at work, the way that I talk to my ministry, because we're not the same. We all have different perspectives and different advantages. I can see myself, for example, as a woman that is Hispanic and that is a member of the LGBT community. I can see that as my strength, but another person might say, "Oh my God, you're screwed. You're not only choosing one disability, but you're choosing three." And so the way that you see yourself and your weakness and be able to transform them as strength, that may be another way to tackle uh, uh, any kind of superiority, because the root of racism is superiority, trying to be superior or more than somebody else. And it's the same thing with bullying, and it's the same thing with any kind of with domestic violence. Is the same root, trying to be better than somebody else, and that's what we need to tackle.
Betsy, you did. You pretty much summed it up. Malia said earlier that when she was younger, she thought she got to a place where she thought she knew everything, where she thought she had learned enough in order to be that teacher, to be that warrior out in the streets on behalf of others. But she found out that she did have more to learn. When we get to the point of thinking that we know everything, that's when we really start running into problems and causing problems for other people. So be gracious, be gracious with yourself when even though you've realized that you're not fully woke, you're still wiping the sleep out of your eyes, you're still getting ready in the morning. But at the same time, you've already crossed the first hurdle, which is understanding that you have more to learn and that there is something wrong with the historical patterns that have subjugated some and made others superior. Just like the conversation that we had last week, when we deal with racism, we have to look at the historical trajectory of it and see how our stories fit into that historical narrative, right? Mm-hmm. Because the world throughout history, from biblical antiquity up till now, there has been a colonization and a hierarchy of life, right? That's developed by a dominant character, that's developed by a dominant culture. And how do we fit into that narrative? Do we err on the side of the superiors, of the colonizers, of the ones that write history, or are we crushed do we side with those that have been crushed by the wheel of colonialism or racial superiority or gender biases or sexuality biases and that kind of thing? So, keep pushing, keep searching for those that are far more wiser than I'll go ahead and say it, that are far more wiser than me. As far as how to unpack this work, as well as what's necessary for the next steps. Now, one of the next steps that I would say is that since you have realized that you are waking up to all of the issues and isms and phobias and that kind of thing of the world, even within your own community, I would say start a conversation with those who aren't thinking about it. those who you have contact with, those who are in your circle of influence. Start having those critical conversations with them and asking them those questions. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this whole George Floyd police in defund police? Start up a conversation with your friends, and then from there, if they go off the rails, go completely right, and say, it's all fluff. It's blown out of proportion. There's no racism. I mean, we had a black president. If they start doing that kind of discussion, check them.
Mm-hmm.
And let them understand, let them know in no uncertain terms that, look, you have a bias that you need to uncover. We got some work to do, friend. And just like Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2, just like Adam and Eve humanity was created with the intent of being mutual, being in community with each other. We have to maintain those lines of conversation with people within our circle of influence, and calling on them to recognize what they don't see, be a mirror for other folks, but also point people back to who is our Christian leader, who is the one that we're supposed to be emulating, who is the one that we're called to progress towards his perfection of, right? Because Jesus gave us a model. Jesus the sable skinned Savior that we serve, gave us a perfect example of how to navigate this life under Roman occupation, when everybody is suffering, from the rich to the poorest, from the blackest to the white. Everybody is suffering from something. But I'm glad we have a big brother. I'm glad we have a Savior that gives us that perfect example of how to overcome and how to be part of intentional community. And I'll stop there.
Christian, you talked about in that last sentence, you said everybody's suffering. So how do we respond when we have somebody who is white that says, well, there are poor white people who don't have access to healthcare? Oh, Malia's ready. Right? What do we say to that? Everybody's suffering.
So the thing that I always fall back on is that so we hear this term systematic racism, and it's 100% true. And what that means is that, for lack of a better phrase, white people control pretty much everything. And so this whole idea of reverse racism doesn't really hold up. And the idea, okay. And that's the other thing. You said, talking about how, well, there are poor white people and there are, things like that. The whole thing with white privilege is not to say that white people aren't going to struggle. It's to say that they're not going to struggle because of their race. So, just because you're white doesn't mean you're not going to be poor or you're not going to get unfairly passed up for a job. It just means that it's not going to be because you're white. It's not, you know what I mean? And so that's why this, reverse racism doesn't uphold, because the system is built for white people. And so if there happens to be a black person that, says, I hate white people, I wish they could all, whatever, nothing is going to happen systemically or systematically that's going to hurt us because of it. So I guess that's my thing, is that
I'm sorry, is the same thing as saying, no, Black Lives Matter is not the correct term. All lives matter is the correct term. Where, no, I mean, it's not that it's right or it's wrong. I mean, the community that currently is having issues, is being marginalized, is the Black community. So Black lives matter.
Absolutely.
That's what we need to understand. If there was, for example, the Holocaust, I mean, and we will be saying, no, it's just that all lives matter. No, I mean, Jews' lives matter, because currently that is the situation that we're dealing with. We're dealing with an oppression. We're dealing with a segregation. So we need to put emphasis on that community. So I agree. I mean, it's the same thing when somebody says, well, what about if I'm a white male, but I'm divorced and I'm being discriminated because I'm divorced at church? Well, I mean, that's not racism. That's other issue. That's another ism that we need to talk about, but it's not racism. So yes, we may be suffering from different things, different biases, different situations, but the situation that we're dealing right now is racism, and we need to tackle it.
So
And I want to, if I can, I want to push it further,
Uh-huh.
just for a quick second.
Oh no, let's do it. Yes.
That notion, the notion of well, let me say it like this. What? Wow, I just lost my whole train of thought. I'm sorry. Jeffrey, go ahead with your question. I'll
well, no,
come back to it.
I was going to say what Malia and Betsy have been saying touches on a question that Cynthia raised in the comments, and that is it possible for a person of color to be racist?
No.
I've been told that's not possible because of systems.
Right.
So
because black people don't have power to wield in this country.
Right.
And going back to what about poor people? What about poor white folks? Yeah, that's where I wanted to go. If someone says that's like an all lives mattering, way to derail the conversation. But it's a perfect way to actually loop them into the conversation and say, okay, I'm glad you understand that. Think about all the systems that have been developed to make sure that black lives don't matter, to make sure that that American policing has roots, which has its roots in slave catching, still exists today. And seeing as how African Americans are relatively 14% of the American population, which is questionable because, I've seen, not everybody classifies themselves as black. They might classify themselves as other, Native American, what have you. But anyway, seeing as how we're 14% of the American population, but 70% of the incarcerated population, something's wrong. And it's not because blacks are inherently criminal. There is a systematic issue that has happened over time that has made policing and has created biases to where, okay, you automatically see me as a criminal. You automatically see me as a troublemaker. You automatically see me as less than. So I'm going to apply the law harder and differently to you, just so you understand that, XYZ, whatever misconceptions they may have developed towards policing black lives as opposed to policing others. Because we see a whole lot of white collar crime that does not get severely as punished as black lives just trying to live.
Mm-hmm.
White.
Yeah, you're right. Because
white collar crime, right? White privilege.
and it's the same thing, Christian, with for example the Hispanic community. I mean,
right.
That the same conversation that you have with your kids on police are gonna be tough on you. Is the same conversation that we have with our kids regarding papers. Because the police automatically, even if you have a tail light or even if you did something minimal, they always gonna ask you for papers. Even if you are an American citizen, even if you are a Hispanic American citizen, the first thing that they're gonna ask you, and I had it happen to me. I mean, and it's okay. I'm okay with it, but that is what we need to fight. We don't need to be okay with it. It's the same thing with you guys. I mean, with the black community, we don't have to be okay with the police treating you bad because you're black. We don't have to be okay with the police asking us for papers when we're legally here. That is automatic racism because of our color of skin. So awareness, talking about it, having this type of conversations, putting them on mainstream so we can be heard, because that's what we need. We need awareness. We need empathy, because my struggle is not the same struggle that John has. and John's struggles are not the same ones as me, and we need to realize that.
Mhm.
Because he may be suffering, for example, from something else, and I need to be empathetic to his needs, and it's the same thing. So awareness, I think that that's one of the key elements.
We shared last week that this country was built, the Constitution of the United States and the subsequent laws that helped codify the United States were constructed for white male landowners. Everybody else, be damned, right? Even including their women, even including their wives.
Yeah.
Their wives had no power, while the white male landowners had all of the power. We also shared last week that human beings have more similarities than differences. Right? On a genetic level, we're basically similar because we come from one source. We come from one human heritage that's just that's been dispersed and transformed over time to acclimate themselves or to acclimate to their regional surroundings, right? But one of the strongest things that pretty much sums up the work that needs to be done amongst minorities of all kinds when faced with the systemic issues, with the systemic isms that have been developed to separate all of us, to make all of us fear each other, to make all of us think we're better than or less than each other, is that I learned this in South Africa. An individual can stand on their own, but an individual can be pretty fragile, right? If I wanted to, I could break one of my fingers, right? But when we learn to be together in solidarity, that punches a mighty blow to the systems that separate all of us.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Betsy and Malia and John. We, of course, want to continue this conversation. Throughout the week, we'll be sharing resources about white privilege, and we encourage you to continue to learn. As we know, awareness is the first step, and continuing to learn is how we keep going. Remember, this is hard work, and this is stuff that you have to care for yourself as you are learning and growing. Do not do it alone. Have conversations with other people. Give yourself room. Give yourself grace and forgiveness. But remember that with forgiveness, there is action. And so when you say, I'm sorry to yourself, you need to change. You need to change behavior. I feel like I'm talking to my teenagers right now. So definitely take care of yourself and be back with us next week, the same time, same channel, 4 o'clock, as we talk about another topic. I want to say it's microaggressions next week. I think it's microaggressions. So we are looking forward to that one, and we will see you then.
Okay. Peace.